Hello, welcome to another episode of Revolutionary Despatches with me, Chris Wright.
And me, David Bryan.
Hello, David.
Hello.
It's all going. I can't say what I want to say because we'll lose our clean rating on iTunes, but the proverbial is hitting the fan.
Yes.
For those
Quite hard.
Yeah. For those who've been living under a rock, essentially the situation is this. The entire British government is about to collapse around our ears.
Yep.
So, Theresa May, our glorious Prime Minister, has managed to lose 2 cabinet secretaries inside a week.
Mm-hmm.
To lose one would be unfortunate, but to lose 2 really starts to look like carelessness.
Well, she lost one, and then decided to use that as a sort of impromptu reshuffle opportunity. All of a sudden, sort of out of nowhere. And then, having concluded that, lost another one.
So the first secretary to go down was Michael Fallon, who resigned over... Well, he didn't make it quite clear. He essentially stated to the press that he felt he had fallen short of the high standards expected of the armed services. Not that he's actually a member of the armed services, which at the point when he said that, the only allegation against him was a fairly minor one, relatively speaking, that he had once touched the knee some years ago of the journalist Julia Hartley-Brewer, who had since sort of basically said that she didn't care that much and she was over it. But it seemed at the time that there must have been something else bubbling away under the surface, and indeed it now appears that is the case.
Yeah.
Because I believe her name's Jane Merrick came out. She'd approached Anna Soubry, the Conservative MP, and also Harriet Harman, the former Labour deputy leader, and essentially said that there had been a historical incident of sexual harassment involving her and Michael Fallon. Anna Soubry then took that to the Prime Minister, and then that was what prompted Michael Fallon's resignation.
Yeah.
And since then, Jane Merrick, she's come out in the press, waived her anonymity in order to make a point, I think. So yes, this is the sort of the biggest scalp so far in the Westminster sexual harassment scandal, which has kind of blown up in the last couple of weeks, spilling over from America, where it all started. It's a very interesting kind of phenomenon, the way that something which started with an American Hollywood executive has become such a huge part now of the British political scene.
Yes.
I think it's very telling about how interconnected the two cultures are, and also how the kind of structures of power are the same across like different areas of what you might loosely term the establishment.
Yes. And this hasn't really spread to or from other European countries.
No. It seems to be at the moment entirely a kind of Anglosphere phenomenon. I mean, really, it's only Britain and America.
Yeah, it's not like Canada's really been hit by it.
No. Or Australia or anywhere like that.
I wonder what that means, because I'm sort of suspicious of the idea that those two countries don't have the same problem. It's just not coming out in them. But this also seems to fit into... there's a sort of, in British government history, governments tend to have a lifespan of about maybe 8 or 9 years. And if they're if they do really well, maybe 10 or 11 years or something. But eventually they start accumulating scandals, and they stop being able to avoid more scandals. And this Conservative government, I mean, it never really won an election properly. So it's always been slightly fragile, and it's now been in power 7 years. So it seems like it's getting to the point where it's just piling up scandals, and it's getting too tired to be able to deal with them properly anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, in fairness to the Tories, which is not something I like to say too often, it isn't a peculiarly Conservative thing either.
Oh, no, not
there have been allegations against Labour MPs in particular, and I'm sure there are probably other parties who may well be implicated in the coming weeks.
And the Labour member of the Welsh Senate.
Yes. Took his own life.
He did, yes.
Yeah. Certainly seems to suggest there's something in whatever allegations were levelled at him in any case.
But the reason why it's sort of impacting the Tories more is because it's taken out their Defence Secretary.
Yes.
Oh, yes, this is the thing that Michael Fallon hasn't been suspended, which is a thing that very often happens when there's a scandal in the government. The affected person resigns from the government, but then nothing else happens. And being an MP is still a very high-profile, very, very senior role in British politics.
Yeah, there was an article to that effect in the new Statesman about a week ago, sort of saying that same thing, that Michael Fallon considers himself to have fallen below the standard expected as Defence Secretary, but not as an MP. So, representing the constituents who elected him is not as prestigious a job in his mind as working with the government.
This is a very strange thing, where in no other job for this sort of thing would... Because often the media describe this sort of thing as being sacked, or resigning, or whatever. But it isn't really. What they've done is they've been demoted to a slightly less senior but still very senior role.
Also the fact that there's no official union representation for MP staff. There is a branch of Unite to the parliamentary estate, but it's not recognised by Parliament. MPs have to recognise it on an ad hoc basis.
Right.
So obviously lots of Labour MPs, majority of Labour MPs recognise it, but it goes less recognised among, for example, the Conservative Party. I mean, some Tory MPs do recognise it, but not all of them. Understandably, because it's an organisation which is expressly affiliated with their political opponents. So if they're given the option, they're not going. You know, they'd have to be very altruistic to recognise it. That's why it shouldn't be an option.
It might just be partly that why he's still an MP. It's particularly true at the moment because the government's so fragile, and it doesn't even have a majority. And even with its sort of not exactly coalition, but confidence partners, still have a tiny majority. They don't really have the room to lose an MP. I think they were 9 short of a majority, I think, at the election. And I think the DUP only have 10 MPs.
So at the moment, the Conservatives have 370 MPs, 2 of whom are currently suspended. Labour have 262, 2 of whom are currently suspended. So yes, the DUP have 10. So 327. So they'd actually only have to lose... Actually, technically they don't have a majority at the moment. Technically they don't have a majority. Sinn Féin don't turn up, so that gives them an extra 4 to play with.
It's very, very fragile.
If they lose 4 more suspensions, they won't have a majority, which is pretty tight going. I mean, it makes John Major and the Maastricht rebels look positively plain sailing.
The thing is that the nature of the abuse is that it's abuse of power, and yet he's not been kicked out of the position of enormous political power that he's in.
As an MP, which is the whole problem starts in the first place. I mean, I don't think it is... Most of these allegations are coming from civil servants.
MPs have staff.
Political staff. So, yeah.
I noticed something when doing research for this. I didn't realise that in order to be actually removed from your seat, you have to be convicted of something with a sentence of over a year in prison. That seems crazy, that you can be arrested and incarcerated for anything less than a year, and it doesn't disqualify you from remaining an MP throughout all of that and then carrying on as an MP afterwards.
Not officially. I mean, I think, obviously, if that were to happen, there would be extreme pressure on you to resign.
You would not actually be required to.
Technically, you can't actually resign as an MP, but you have to...
No, don't they have to appoint you to a meaningless title in the aristocracy so that you technically are disqualified from being an MP?
It's not within the aristocracy, it's a minor position within the Duchy of Lancaster, and if you work for the Queen, work for the Queen, you obviously can't sit in Parliament.
Right, and so they invent a new title for you.
Yeah, I forget what it's called. The Chiltern Hundreds. Crown Steward and Bailiff of the Chiltern Hundreds and of the Manor of Northstead. Because,
they appoint you that?
Yes, that's the official title, because if you have an office of profit under the Crown, you're not eligible to sit as an MP. That's how you officially get out of it.
Yes, but there is also the fact that, aside from this, Fallon is quite nasty anyway. He's not a good guy. We're very glad he's gone.
Yes, I mean, he's been used essentially as May's attack dog. He's always willing to sort of turn up on TV.
Yes, he'll say stuff which is quite likely to get some very, very negative sort of sideways looks from the press in order to sound out the waters and see if other Tories can get away with repeating it afterwards.
Yeah, he's a bit of a bully. Not particularly effective as a Defence Secretary either, by all reports.
I very much enjoyed seeing there was during the election campaign, he was on, I think, the Andrew Marr show with Emily Thornberry.
Oh, right.
And she ambushed him with some question about...
Yeah, I seem to remember that, yeah.
Yeah. I enjoyed watching that, it was quite funny.
Well, I mean, Emily Thornberry is very, very good. Even a decent Defence Secretary would struggle, I think, to riposte. But yes, Michael Fallon certainly doesn't fall into that category. So anyway, he's gone, and his replacement is Mr. Gavin Williamson, who is an interesting choice. He's the former Chief Whip, which means that he is the owner of the infamous spreadsheet that you may have seen floating around the internet in a redacted form, listing various Tory MPs and their sexual misdemeanours, so everything ranging from consensual affairs that are kind of, perfectly morally fine as far as I'm concerned, but might seem dodgy coming from a Tory MP, all the way through to allegations of rape. So it's a very wide range of different things that are presented on this spreadsheet, which has been
very big cupboard with all the skeletons in it.
Exactly. So he has had this spreadsheet since he's been Chief Whip, which is I think about a year now. Before he was Chief Whip, he was David Cameron's personal secretary. He knew all of this before it blew up. So it's very, very odd that Theresa May has decided to appoint him to replace someone who's just been forced out because of a sexual harassment scandal. And it very much suggests that she's completely lost control, even the pretense of control. Because
she doesn't really have any other options. She just needs someone that she knows is going to support her government in the position of Defence Secretary.
And the whisper on the street is actually that Gavin Williamson has sort of promoted himself
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's supposed to be...
He's been floating around in relatively sort of senior positions within the party and the government for a while, but never actually like a member of the government, never a government minister.
No, well, he has a tarantula called Kronos, which he keeps on his desk in his office.
Odd name for a tarantula.
Yeah. That's Kronos.
King of the Titans.
Not Cronus. Which is
I see.
irritating. I've seen this. A number of articles I've seen talking about Cronus, and they say, it's the Greek god of time. No, Cronus is the Greek god of time. Kronos is, as you say, the king of the Titans, the father of Zeus. Two completely different characters conflated by the Romans inaccurately. Anyway, that's just a minor mythological bugbear of mine.
Yes. The Titans being the pantheon before the Olympians.
Indeed.
In Greek myth.
Yes. But, so he's the new defence secretary, despite having no discernible qualifications for the job other than his tarantula, which I suppose he could threaten Kim Jong-un when it came to it. But yeah, he fancies himself a bit of a Francis Urquhart, I think, which is slightly fraught comparison given other allegations against other people across the channel, but we won't be diverted.
Well, you might think that. I couldn't possibly comment.
Yes. For anyone who doesn't get that joke, you need to watch House of Cards, the original British series, which has no known rapists in it, to my knowledge.
No.
And it's much, much better.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yes, I get what you're saying now.
Yeah. But so he's the new defence secretary, and it very much does appear that Theresa May's completely lost the plot, which leads us to Priti Patel.
Yes, that's where it was left until very, very recently.
Priti Patel has also been forced to resign.
What was her position again?
She was the Secretary of State for the Department of International Development.
Right.
So
yes.
Patel is a very, 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 very right-wing Tory MP.
Yeah.
Whose basic position on international development
super hardline
is
Brexiter as well.
There shouldn't be any.
Yes.
So why she was ever given the brief in the first place, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, she's super, super Brexit. One of the kind of truest believers, I think, in the whole party, which is, why she was in the cabinet in the first place. But she's been forced to resign because on her holiday, in inverted commas, she was having secret meetings with Israeli officials. 12 of them.
Secret not meaning not public, meaning the government didn't know about it.
Well, the Foreign Office didn't know. Or didn't know about all of them. There's a suggestion they might have known about one, but not told Theresa May.
Yes.
But yeah, so there's some meetings that were going on which Theresa May didn't know about. There were some others going on which the Foreign Office didn't know about. And this was all supposed to be while she was on a family holiday, but she just happened to bump into Benjamin Netanyahu, as you do. And one of the things that she said in one of these meetings was she offered the Israelis aid, humanitarian aid, for settlers in the Golan Heights, which is an occupied region, which is actually part of Syria's sovereign territory.
Yeah.
Which, whatever your opinions on the current Syrian government, and mine are not particularly fond, was occupied by the Israelis after the Six-Day War, and has remained under military occupation since then. So, yeah. I'm not surprised she's been forced to resign. I'm surprised it took as long as it did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a couple of days. And the only reason she got forced out in the end is because some more meetings turned up that she hadn't... Because when she apologised to May the first time round, she said there was no more to come, and then there was more, and then that's when she finally got rid of her. But,
yeah.
I mean, it's beggars belief. Absolutely beggars belief.
It also leaves the government with a bit of a hole, in that it's always worth remembering that Theresa May campaigned for Remain. So she needs credentials that she genuinely supports Brexit now.
Yeah.
She needs to make sure that she has something to prove to the Brexit wing of the party. So bringing on Priti Patel made that very, very clear. And I think she had exactly equal numbers in her cabinet
she's been taking
for
pains
people who
to make
supported
sure it's
Remain
equal.
and Leave. So now she's got a hole.
Yeah. She has to fill it with another arch-Brexiteer.
Yes.
Unfortunately, as Stephen Bush pointed out this morning in his morning email, the list of hardline Brexiteer MPs with an interest in international development is exactly one. And unfortunately, that one is Priti Patel.
Yes.
So there's no one else really to
Hardline
go
Brexit and interest in international development don't really go together that well.
No, they really, really don't.
I can't think of any other hardline Brexit MPs that have a bit of sort of status. There's Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, I mean, this is it. It's not impossible.
Would Theresa May want someone who's arguably more popular in the party than she is in her cabinet?
Fran's close.
But then again, she's got Boris Johnson.
Well, I don't know if he is more popular than her at the moment.
Probably with the activists, but then again, it's the Tory party. Activists aren't important in the Tory party.
No, exactly. Well, I mean, Boris Johnson's had his own fair share of scandals this week.
That's very true.
Because he's managed to drop some poor woman who is out in Iran and has been arrested and accused of spreading propaganda Wright in it. Because she was originally claiming that she was just on holiday in Iran and that wasn't doing anything illicit at all. Boris Johnson then in remarks, I believe in a committee hearing, or it might have been on the floor of the House, but in any case, in some remarks, said that all she'd been doing was training journalists, which sounds nice, except that's not what she'd claimed, and the Iranians aren't too keen on free press, so she's been called back into court and is now looking like she might have her sentence doubled, which, as far as...
It's not really the job of the Foreign Secretary to do that.
No, it's sort of his job to do the opposite. So yeah, that in any other time and place would be a resigning issue, but of course Theresa May is...
And there have been calls from both sides of the House for him to resign, including from some quite prominent Tories.
But Theresa May is so weak she can't do it. And again, Boris Johnson is a Brexiter, albeit a late convert. So if she gets rid of him as well, she's really in trouble.
And Boris is one of those people who... He's quite dangerous to have outside your tent.
Yes, you don't want him running around stirring up trouble on the backbenches, which is the one thing he is kind of good at. That and writing insulting
which is the entire issue here. He's caused too much trouble.
Yes, stirring things up is a Boris Johnson speciality.
It's not really a Foreign Secretary speciality.
No,
but,
they're supposed to be the nation's chief diplomat.
Try and think of a diplomatic conservative. I think Boris Johnson may be very near the bottom of the list.
It's not a long list in any case.
That's very true.
But yeah, he certainly wouldn't be my pick. Yeah, so we've got one Secretary of State sexually harassing women. We've got another promising illicit aid to settler colonial apartheid ethno-states in the Middle East.
Without the knowledge of the Prime Minister.
Without the knowledge of the Prime Minister, already the Foreign Office. And then we've got a third Secretary of State, doubling the sentences of British nationals detained abroad. This is not a government I think is long for this world.
From 2015, they had unexpectedly come to a majority when not even they thought they were going to. They suddenly did much better than they thought they would. Then, Brexit happened, within a year of that, and then Labour started tanking in the polls and they were up at 40% and they had a 20-point lead and what have you. Everyone was saying, somehow the Conservative Party has, by some alchemy, made itself into a major, moving into its dominant phase, and that they were going to dominate for the next, 15 years, and that it was going to take ages for anyone to be able to knock them out. And very, very quickly, within a year since that election, it's just a complete mess.
Yeah. Entirely coming apart at the seams. Which...
It's amazing how easily it's fallen apart, given how strong they were a few months ago.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, people were saying, Britain will be conservative until 2030. Now it looks like making it to the end of 2017 might be a struggle, and it's already November.
Yeah. Even given the disaster of the election, this has gone worse than it had to.
Oh, much, much worse.
They've gotten weaker since then.
Yeah. I mean, to lose 2 Secretaries of State in a week, and then to have another one who should have gone by now, 2 MPs suspended. If they lose 4 more, they lose their majority. I mean, it's just...
And are behind in the polls.
Yes. Albeit not by a huge amount.
Not by a huge amount, but...
But yes. Consistently trailing. Which at this point in our government's term, they tend to be ahead.
And of course, you've got to remember that they... Winning by the small margin that they didn't get a majority. If they lose by a bit...
Yes.
They're in trouble. And given that we've sort of reverted to this broadly 2-party system, small swings around the mid-40s in the polls, when it comes to an election, end up actually converting into sizable seat swings sometimes.
Yeah.
There's no sort of large S with a large Liberal Democrat going on.
No, the Liberal Democrats are looking really, really weak.
Yes, they've completely not had the comeback that people were sort of expecting them to have at some point.
Yeah.
They collapsed in 2010, and it's been years now, but they've never been able to recover from it.
And there are very few seats in which they're second place as well. At the moment, they've got hardly any MPs, but there just aren't that many places where they could realistically gain any either at the next election. So I think we're definitely looking at a de facto 2-party system for the foreseeable. On the current...
With the exception of the SNP?
Yes, of course, yeah, in England and Wales. I think on the current polling, Labour would take, according to my model that I've knocked together very roughly, Labour would take 20 seats off the Tories.
Right. So that's Labour up 20, Tories down 20.
Yes, that's direct seats from the Tories. Regardless of whatever else happens elsewhere with the SNP or whatever, they would take, on the current polling, you would expect Labour to take about 20 seats off the Tories, which wouldn't give them a majority, but would make them, I believe, the largest party.
Yes. There's also the thing that the Conservatives did very well in Scotland compared to what their polling was like in their sort of historical record in Scotland.
Yeah.
That's quite unlikely to happen again.
Oh, yes.
And on the other hand, Labour are polling ahead of what they got in the election in Scotland. So they're likely to be able to... Because people are focusing on the fact that Tories got a bit of a comeback in Scotland at the expense of the SNP, but so did Labour and the Lib Dems. Labour are in a position to carry that on if another election were to happen, and the Conservatives aren't.
Yeah.
They're likely to lose their gains in Scotland. Labour are likely to build on theirs. There is also the fact that, you say in England and Wales it's a two-party system de facto, but in Wales, Labour are... There's only been one poll, but Labour are 18 points ahead. But before the election, that wasn't true. The Tories won, that were ahead in a couple of polls in Wales, I think.
They did very well in the local elections in Wales. Yeah, people were worried that the Conservatives would beat Labour in Wales for the first time, I think, since like 1920.
That did not happen in the end, but...
It did not, no. So yes, not looking very good for the current government.
No. I've heard some stuff that... I don't really know much detail about it, but it's something that Paul Mason said. So I really should look into this at some point. But that Wales is quite a unique example in that it's a country very, very far down the route of post-industrial society. Like, very, very completely. And it has an amount of autonomy of its own. And there's not really another example of that anywhere else in the West. The places that have that level of autonomy. And such a consistently centre-left government. And are very post-industrial.
No.
So in terms of, like, job insecurity and, like, information economy and post-industrial, how an economy is supposed to look and how you protect workers' rights in that kind of a context, Wales is sort of at the forefront.
Shall we turn then to the Paradise Papers?
Yes.
So this is sort of another big document dump on sort of the same model as the Panama Papers back in 2016. Again, through the same newspaper in Germany, in fact, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, the South German Times. This is less material in terms of number of documents, but more high-profile people implicated. For example, there is some business dealings that people who work very closely for Donald Trump have had with members of Putin's inner circle, which would sort of seem to support the allegations that the Russians had something to do with the liaising with the Trump campaign in America, which would of course be illegal and could result in Trump's impeachment should the Democrats take back the House.
That was something quite surprising about the Panama Papers, which is that it's a major expose about corruption and what have you. And Putin wasn't implicated in anything.
David Cameron did, though.
He did, yes.
Nothing seemed to happen with that.
No. Oh, to be fair, very, very quickly afterwards, he did happen to stop being Prime Minister.
That is true. The other sort of big kind of media talking point on the Paradise Papers has been the Queen, who's...
Yes, that's an upgrade. From the Prime Minister to the Queen, that's more high profile.
Yes, indeed. So she invests her money through the Duchy of Lancaster, which is sort of her more, I suppose, commercial arm. It's not quite the right word, but yeah. So the Duchy of Lancaster invests money on her behalf.
Is that a sub-part of the Crown Corporation, or is that just another legal entity that she also happens to own?
I believe it's a separate legal entity because it's a different title. She is the Duke of Lancaster as well as being the Queen of the United Kingdom.
As if being Queen wasn't enough.
It's kind of her equivalent of the Duchy of Cornwall. Anyway, so one of the investment companies that the Duchy of Lancaster was using has been connected with some of the documents in this dump, including a total of around 10 million from the Queen's private treasury was held in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda, and there's been money linked to the company Bright House, which is a rent-to-own firm, which has been criticised for irresponsible lending on the sort of same lines as payday lenders like Wonga.com and people like that. It's not quite the same business model, but they've been accused of sort of the same kinds of practices. Obviously, the Queen herself wouldn't have had any knowledge of the specifics.
I very much doubt that Elizabeth Windsor knows anything about this.
No, well, she does now. And I imagine a few people were rather chewed out when she did find out, but in any case.
This reminds me of when the Church of England was caught up in something similar to this recently.
Yeah, because Justin Welby was banging on about being opposed to payday loans, and then it turned out that the church was actually investing money in Wonga.
I think it goes to show that they really didn't know anything about it.
No, but this is the point: it's irresponsible to use these kinds of investment companies because you don't know where your money is going, but you are funding these companies. Okay, in this case, it was an irresponsible rent company. That's one thing, but in the past there have been links to kind of arms companies through these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
It is irresponsible to put your wealth into these kinds of investment funds because you don't know where they're going, and it kind of just exposes how interconnected the kind of global system of capital really is. The fact that you have the Secretary of State for whatever in America, investing in the same firms as Donald Trump's best mate, as Vladimir Putin's best mate rather. But yeah, if you've got a complicated financial system like this one, you are going to get these kinds of connections forming, and it creates a sort of set of perverse incentives for people who are supposed to be in positions of political authority, because their interests don't align with the interests of the people they're supposed to be working on behalf of.
No. So there's an aspect to this which is that individuals using these kinds of mechanisms to avoid tax isn't as important directly as when corporations do it. Because that's when genuinely large amounts of money that could be going to, funding the welfare state and what have you, are being lost by corporations that are being allowed structurally to avoid it.
Yeah.
But the reason why when individuals do it, it's significant, particularly if they're politicians, is because these are the people that's supposed to be trying to stop the corporations from doing this. So how could they ever be looking to try and close these loopholes if they're using them themselves?
Yeah, exactly. And also, it isn't just individuals. I mean, Apple, for example, has been caught up in similar kind of allegations. They moved all of their overseas funds to Jersey because they used to store it in Ireland, but then Ireland shored up its corporation tax system, so they then moved it over to Jersey, which has basically no corporation tax whatsoever.
It is also slightly different when the Queen does it, because she isn't just an individual, she's also the personal embodiment of the Crown, which is quite a large legal entity.
Yeah, which is not only essentially a massive corporation, but also the head of state. So
Yes,
if the Queen does something, it is in effect as if Britain does something, because she has that position as head of state. Frustrating also that in the aftermath of the Panama Papers, nothing really happened with Cameron. There were lots of people accused of misbehaviour. It wasn't pursued. We've since had the explosion of popularity for Jeremy Corbyn. They had the burn in his hands phenomena in America. So I think this has received a little more attention because people's focus is more on inequality and more on how the super rich corporations and individuals both kind of squirrel away their wealth to avoid funding the services which that money should be going towards. But
yes, the public conversation is sort of in a place where it can talk about this sort of thing more seriously at the moment.
Yes, but even so, it hasn't been talked about that much. It's kind of been buried. I mean, there has been a real flurry of news recently, so it's understandable to an extent, but it has sort of been buried very quickly. And this is, big money. I mean, Apple are the largest corporation on the planet, and they don't pay much tax.
No.
Google don't pay really any tax. Huge corporations. Lots of people like Google in particular have this kind of folksy charm to them. Everything's colourful, and they pretend to be your friend and all of this. But actually, they're not. They are cold-heartedly ruthless corporate entities.
There is still a hierarchically organised system of power with people above who give orders that have to be followed by the people below them in the hierarchy that has the single goal of making profit. The fundamentals of capitalism are still there. But the trouble with this is that, sort of in the neoliberal era, the sort of Faustian bargain that the centre-left parties did was say, okay, we'll turn a blind eye to sort of corporate what have you, and we will say you can have your deregulation or whatever, but we will skim a bit off the top and we'll use it to fund our welfare state. That was the understanding. And that's sort of what held New Labour together. That's why quite a lot of people on the left of the party still signed up to the basic programme of the Labour government, the last one, because they were able to unite behind the idea that we should increase public spending on services and things. That doesn't work if they don't pay tax.
No. It also doesn't work if you have a government that couldn't care less about public services, but that's...
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was the flip side that the centre-right parties did, which is that they knew they could get people to sort of accept a deregulation which people don't naturally want to accept if they say, well, we'll give you lots of public services and that'll be nice. Which is really what people wanted coming out of the 80s, because, NHS was not in a good state when they'd always left it.
But, I mean, it is completely ridiculous. I mean, you think that the corporation tax rate in this country is, decreasing, gone down from about, I think it was about 22% before the Tories came in. Now I think it's down to about 17%. In America, they're talking about, Donald Trump's talking about cutting it by 15 points. They have, relative to us, a fairly high corporate tax rate in America, but very, very
Yes,
low.
I've always found that odd. America tends to have quite low taxes. pretty much across the board, America has low taxes, with the exception of corporation tax, which is surprisingly high.
But as I say, the Republicans are now talking about changing that, cutting 15 percentage points off of that tax over there.
It might partly be because everyone wants to set up shop in America.
Yeah.
So they can afford to sort of charge a premium. This is a thing that people sometimes bring up in conversations about tax avoidance by corporations, which is that, well, we should just have a lower tax rate so that they don't feel like they have to avoid it. But that's not the premise of, democratic state plus capitalism. That's not the premise of this whole thing. That's not how... That can't be the relationship between a democratic state and a global corporate system, that they get to dictate policy.
Well, I mean, that is the premise.
that is what actually happens. Yes. But we can't explicitly say that. We can't allow... we can't start accepting that and making policy based on it. Based on the idea that that's the way things are and we're just going to have to deal with it. No. We should decide on our own tax rates democratically, and if that then ends up leading to a contradiction, that means that there's something wrong with the system more fundamentally. Doesn't mean we should just, not do what we've democratically decided to.
It's also important, I think, to have international cooperation on this. This is why I think the EU has such potential as an institution, despite all its many flaws, is because the only way you can really combat capital on a global scale is by organising labour on a global scale.
Yeah.
And the only way that states can resist the depredations of capital, assuming they come under the control of left or centre-left governments, is by organising together. So the EU, while it remains a neoliberal club, is an institution which will promote neoliberal policies. That's obvious. But if we can elect...
Well, the thing is that the EU could be an international forum. It's just that there isn't the only part of this equation that has currently got itself internationally organised properly is the corporate side of the equation.
Yeah.
Whereas the other side of that, the popular organisations, the people who are going to try and work for, people, basically, isn't properly internationally organised. So international forums end up looking like corporate forums, because corporations are the only thing that's properly international at the moment. This is the basic problem with the kind of Marine Le Pen nationalism. Well, it's one of the many problems with it. She set herself up as, I'm a nationalist, as opposed to a globalist.
Yeah.
But the point is that the proper counterpoint to globalism can't be nationalism, because the entire problem with globalisation is that the nation-state can't do anything about it on its own. So you have to have... The proper opposition to an international corporate system is an international popular organisation.
And that's the only way you can prevent that kind of capital flight from occurring, because if the whole of Europe has the same or roughly similar tax rates, then there's nowhere for them to go. They have to operate somewhere. That's also why we should exert more authority over our crown dependencies, I think.
And our overseas territories and all of the other ridiculously complicated semi-independent parts of the UK. A lot of the issues that we face at the moment, not just this one and the directly economic ones, but also, climate change, for example. Changing nature of intellectual property now that we have automation and what have you. All of the sort of emerging problems of the 21st century are problems of planetary scale. And so, to face them, you need more international organisation. So I think that's the direction that we have to be going in, basically, ultimately. Which has always been the position of, international socialist movements.
I mean, socialism in one country cannot work. It just can't,
Trotsky did nothing wrong.
But he did a few things wrong. It was
he did, yes.
Pretty brutal commander of the Red Army. Quite funny.
Yeah. He had a very special train.
I always have arguments with people like, if Trotsky had become leader of the Soviet Union instead of Stalin, it would have been so much better. Like, I don't know about that, actually. His economics is a sounder theory, but,
It probably would have been better than Stalin.
Maybe. But as commanders in the Red Army, Trotsky was worse. Trotsky was much more ruthless. Yeah. Stalin was incompetent, but Trotsky was the more brutal of the two. Now, Stalin was kind of obsessed with bureaucracy, and that ultimately was what strangled off the Soviet Union, but who knows? Anyway,
Trotsky was also explicitly arguing for more democracy in the future Soviet Federal Republic thing. But you've got to remember he was also a politician. Lenin also argued for that at times, but never did it, because that is what the population will have wanted, and so obviously it's what they said.
This is an excellent transition into sort of very naturally happen all by itself because if you get a bunch of incorrigible leftists in a place, they will start talking about Trotsky and Stalin and Lenin eventually. But this week actually does mark the 100-year anniversary of the October Revolution. It
certainly does, yes.
Yeah, it was on Tuesday, the 7th of November, is the anniversary of the October Revolution.
Obviously.
And
why
course,
wouldn't the anniversary of the October Revolution be in early November?
Yeah, it would be ludicrous to suggest anything else. Stupid Gregorian calendars, things.
Yes, Russia was still on the Julian calendar at the time.
Yes.
So,
Orthodox Christianity for you. But,
yep.
Yes, so we were supposed to be recording actually on the anniversary, but that ended up not occurring.
No. I had to try and get a degree.
Yes, which is a completely
very
ridiculous pursuit. Yeah. Which I think should be abandoned by all right-thinking people. Anyway, I thought it would be nice to have a quick little chat about the legacy of the October Revolution and what it means for the left today, because that seems to be what everyone else is doing. So I think we should get in on the action.
Yeah,
so take it away there, David.
Well,
I love a nice big well.
In the 20th century, basically, there were three broad strains in the left, you might say. What you might call the social democratic tradition, what you might call the Leninist tradition, and what you might call the libertarian tradition, or the anarchist tradition. And in their own way, all of them had their own achievements, and all of them ultimately failed to change capitalism fundamentally. They all succeeded in very different ways, and they all failed in very different ways as well.
I think that's fair to say.
And with all of them had sort of disappeared by the early 90s, or not disappeared, been actively smashed with paramilitary violence in many cases. But
in Europe and America, North America, social democracy sort of struggled on a bit longer in Latin America.
That's true, actually, yes.
But yeah.
But in this second decade of the 21st century, it would appear that straightforward left wing has some critical things to say about capitalism. Leftism has started to re-emerge again.
Which is good for us, because it means we have an audience for this podcast.
Yes, very much so. But is it taking something characteristic of any of the primary strains of 20th century leftism? Is it taking the form of any of those? I don't know. I don't think it fits properly, any of them. It appears to be predominantly social democratic, at least in Europe. But also, you've got large sections of Syria that are now being governed on an anarchist basis.
Yeah. Well, that was really... That's the creation of the Civil War. It's interesting that the kind of the high point of the anarchist tradition in the 20th century was during the Spanish Civil War. And it's interesting that you have that kind of parallel in Syria with the creation of the popular committees there. I actually wrote about them in my undergraduate dissertation, but for some reason the actual technical name that they gave themselves has vanished from my mind, so apologies for any Syrians listening. We should have a bunch of people from Papua New Guinea listening. I don't know why that is. I checked the stats on the Soundcloud, and our top three countries are Britain, America, and Papua New Guinea.
I'm slightly surprised that we've even got Americans.
Yeah, it's very odd. SoundCloud does weird things with its... Yeah, I don't know if that's people listening through Papua New Guinean...
That's a good point.
...based VPNs or something, I don't know. But there's quite a lot, and they all seem to be from the same town. Anyway, never mind. Let's...
Or maybe it's one person's heard about us by chance, they've told their friends.
Yeah, that's possible, entirely possible. But anyway...
I do think they speak English in Papua New Guinea, so...
Do they?
I think New Guinea's one of the places that has the most complicated linguistics.
Yeah, it has tons and tons
it has
of
loads of languages. But so I think we'd leave that. But
yeah. Let's not get into that one. Then. But yeah, worth mentioning. But yeah, I think it's, as you say, the social democratic tradition. I think is the basis for a lot of it. Certainly in say Britain, Jeremy Corbyn obviously comes out of the kind of the Benite sort of social democratic kind of left wing of social democracy.
The social democratic version of radical left-wing stuff.
Yeah. But there's a lot of elements of a more horizontalist structure, which I think is kind of the inheritance from the anarchist tradition. You had with like the UK Uncut and the protests in 2011, you had everything was organised. There was no leaders of those movements. They were all horizontalist movements, and the kind of the parallel emergence of Occupy. And even the Arab Spring, to the extent it was a left-wing uprising, though obviously Islamist elements and various other elements mixed in. But the left-wing part of the Arab Spring, again, as you were saying with Syria, they're organised on a very horizontalist basis, which is something which you didn't necessarily get with old-fashioned social democracy. I mean, the Labour Party, very, in the early 20th century, is actually a very top-down hierarchical organisation.
Very much so.
The Bolsheviks before the revolution were more democratic than the British Labour Party. Both on one.
Certainly.
Obviously the Electoral College was only abolished in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And that...
What a Red Miliband.
Yeah. Was it... It might have been 2012. But yeah, under Red Miliband. So,
yes, that is this. And the flip side of that is that there's not a major communist party in Britain.
No.
When there was. Well, there are loads of communist parties in Britain, but the point was that in the 20th century, there were several times when the Communist Party had MPs. I think that's very unlikely to happen again.
Well, they were kind of torn apart, though, because they couldn't agree whether they were Stalinists or Trotskyists or Maoists or whatever else it was. And they had they subscribed to that very authoritarian version of communism, which was the hallmark of the Soviet and the Chinese.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying, is that third sort of aspect of 20th century leftism that was very, very powerful and influential, just like anarchism and social democracy were, does not appear to be coming back. But anarchism is more than it did the first time round. All three of them failed.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, I think that what happens in the 21st century will have to be something that isn't any of them.
Yes.
But I think that whatever it is, it should probably take more influence from libertarians than from Stalinists. I think it's a good thing that appears to be what's happening.
Well, I'm glad we can agree on that, at least. All the tankies can leave their comments below. No ice pick or Kronstadt jokes, please.
But oddly, it is social democracy that's come back the most dramatically, though.
Yes.
It's the least dramatic of the three, I think. But
well, it poses a more gradualist transition, but at the same time, I think people see it as more achievable in the short term. The problem that say anarchism has is it's a long build up to the one great revolutionary moment, and then if it works ideally, the immediate collapse of the state and the ushering in of a libertarian communist society. Now, that's fine and it's all very well, and there's a rich intellectual tradition of the kind of libertarian anarchist left, but it doesn't mean very much to people living under capitalism now if you tell them that at some point there'll be a glorious revolution and everything will be different. Whereas social democracy says, right, this is what we can achieve in the next year. This is what we can achieve in the next 5 years, the next 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years.
And especially at a time when people are they've had decades of not really having anything any sort of ideal to strive for. It's very, very difficult to sell people this idea of we'll come up with this entirely new thing and imagine a completely different future.
Yeah.
Whereas what social democracy can do is it can look at capitalism and say, that's not very good, that's not very good, that's not very good, and here's things that we're going to do about it. It suits itself to a movement still working out how to be self-confident again, I think.
And so this is why I decided to join the Labour Party, not because the goals of the 2017 manifesto are mine, because they don't go nearly far enough, but because they are putting forward a policy programme under Jeremy Corbyn now, which I think could actually do some good. I also think Jeremy Corbyn is considerably more radical than his manifesto, the manifesto that he stood on. I mean, obviously he had to make concessions.
Yes. I do think that manifesto is the sort of manifesto that Jeremy Corbyn should have stood on.
Yes.
Given the situation, that was the best way to go, I think.
Yeah, especially given the polling beforehand. If he'd gone too radical.
I mean, that's how you do electoral politics. You get in on a popular basis, and then you do what you've said, and then you see whether you have a mandate to do more.
Yes. Yeah.
At least that's what you should do.
Yeah. There's also, I think, some of the things which are starting to be picked up by people in the kind of new left, if you can call it that. Particularly, actually, John McDonnell's been talking a lot about things like this, but the problems and also the opportunities that are presented by things like automation and the idea of universal basic income, which has been floated around. They've tried it in Finland. Switzerland nearly voted for it. I think we've mentioned this before. But those are ideas which didn't really exist in the 20th century. No. They are something new. Podemos have talked about these kinds of things as well, so it's not a peculiarly British thing by any means.
No.
It's those new ideas which I think are going to sort of be some of the most important, actually, as we move into sort of the mid-century.
It does appear to me that the 21st century faces new problems that are qualitatively different from the problems of the 20th century. And the radical left appears to be basically the only people trying to come up with new solutions to fit the new problems.
Yeah.
Everyone else is just running with their old line that they've been doing for centuries.
It's actually really interesting because obviously in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx talks about all that is solid melting into air, the kind of the constant turnover and change that capitalism brings. Like nothing stays still. There's constant innovation. That has stopped. That has ceased to be the case in the last 10 years since the 2008 recession, even slightly before. Innovation has massively slowed. The only place where real innovation is taking place is in the financial sector, and there it's just more and more complicated ways of making money that doesn't make its way into the rest of society. There is innovation.
Well, it's arguable that's very often what happens on a cycle of about every, I think, 125 years or so. There's a sort of sticking point where capital stops really working out how to invest itself properly in an economy, so it retreats into the finance system.
It's longer even than that, I think, since we last had a period of stagnation of this length.
Well, this is what Paul Mason argues, which is that capitalism goes through these kind of major step changes. The last one being the turn of the 20th century, as in going into the 20th century, and that led into when capitalism got going again. That was what the Belle Epoque was. Paul Mason argues that this one is different, that there is no way for capitalism to sort of unstick itself and get going again, which is why the stagnation period has been much longer than it normally is.
I think it's something like 170 years since there's been a period of no wage growth, no productivity growth that's lasted this long, and that's the real problem, is that productivity isn't going up, wages have stagnated, so people are used to feeling like their lives are slowly improving. That's kind of the pact that was struck with in the 1930s and 40s, the New Deal in America, the Attlee reforms in Britain. That was and even through recessions, even surviving the Thatcher years, that pact remained fundamentally in place. It's gone now. There's no productivity increase. That means there's no wage increase. Technological innovation is kind of constrained to, as we said, the finance sector, and also sort of consumer goods that don't particularly benefit society in kind of meaningful ways.
But that's the old Marxist argument, not to get too, right on. But it's actually slightly post-Marxist. But the idea of the tendency of the profit rate to fall. Capitalism, when it adopts a model, the model immediately starts making itself obsolete, to the point where you can't keep making profit in the old way as well. The immediate response of capital is always to try and suppress wages to maintain, to get profits back up. Organised labour fights back. There's a deadlock. Usually capital retreats into the finance system. And then eventually someone comes up with a new model to innovate their way out of it. And so that you can have growth carrying on the basis of not cutting wages again, and so growth starts again. That has not happened. In fact, it should really have happened in the 70s. But instead of the deadlock remaining until someone innovated their way out of it, the deadlock remained until someone just smashed organised labour out of the way and then gave people access to credit instead of increasing wages again.
Yeah.
So, as a sort of, since the 70s, the post-war model of capitalism that should have ended in about the 70s has been sort of living on borrowed time. And the whole enormous quantities of debt that it's been trying to run itself off of since then blew up in its face in 2008. And it's not really known what to do ever since. Have I wrapped that up too neatly?
Yeah, you sort of have. I've got nothing else to say. Exactly. Exactly. One thing I will say is that it seems to me more and more that the predictions made by Capital are truer of the modern era than they have been at any point since that book was written. And
yes.
And actually, if there was a time, where socialism of some variety was to become the logical next step, not just something to aspire towards, but in a kind of historically deterministic sense, not that I'm saying history is deterministic, but in that sense that it becomes the logical next step, I think now is that time.
So there's been a lot of very sophisticated economics done, studying the way capitalism works and what have you. But Marx and the people that call themselves Marxists who came after Marx, it's sort of the only time when, how do I put it, capitalism's been analysed to that level of detail from a non-capitalist perspective. So whether you thought that it was a good idea or not, it's analysing it in a great deal of detail without assuming that it's a good idea in the first place. So it's sort of the only critique which can handle both the idea of capitalism and non-capitalism. So it's the only one that could possibly talk about a kind of transition where capitalism is finding it difficult to even work in the normal capitalist way, which is what's happening now. Capitalism is finding it very hard to do capitalism properly. Marx, even towards the end of his life, wrote, I think it's called The Fragment on Machines, But it's a sort of thought experiment. He didn't finish it because it was towards the end of his life. He never really developed it very much. But it was about imagining a perfect machine that never broke down and didn't require updating, and didn't require any labour to be done on it, and it just worked. And if you insert that into a market system, what does it do? What does it do to the price mechanism? What does it do to wages? What does it do to everything? How does capitalism deal with that? Basically, his answer was, it can't. It breaks. And software particularly, but also any kind of automated production in which the automation runs on software, gets very, very close to that idea.
And closer all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what driverless cars will do to the transport industry. They will completely break it.
But, example, what sets the prices of songs on iTunes? Because it can't be supply, because supply is infinite.
Yeah.
It can't really be demand, because demand fluctuates all over the place and the price doesn't, and for all we know, it's effectively infinite anyway.
Yeah.
It can't be some kind of intrinsic quality, because
all
the songs are the same. Yeah. It's because Apple has a monopoly, and it's decided that's going to be the price.
Yeah.
So when the normal market price mechanism doesn't work anymore, because the technology that you're working with is sort of inherently capitalist systems can't handle it, the only way that you can maintain profit is by forming big monopolies that then just set prices. So this is why information technology companies tend to be very, very large.
Yes.
And why for example, we have a big six in energy in this country that produce energy. But there's not a big six search engines. There's just Google. But the thing is that, take Uber, for example. That's not actually a very complicated idea. Someone else could just write an alternative to Uber. There probably is one out there.
Well, there are a couple, actually. Lyft is one.
Yeah. But the fundamental problem with that, the thing that they're running up against, is Uber. The fact that exists.
Yeah.
And so the thing that people want out of that is the fact that everyone uses the same one, and that you can... So it's an information exchange thing.
Well, that's what makes Facebook so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Because there's no point having... that's why Google Plus never took off. There's no point having two social networks. No one needs two social networks to do the same thing. You can have, things like Instagram or Twitter, which are a different thing. But there's no point having two versions of Facebook, because all of the utility of Facebook comes from the fact that everybody's on it.
But the reverse of that would be something like Wikipedia, which is run on a non-capitalist model. It's free. It's people doing stuff for free, and the product that you get out of them, you can get for free. So it's purely communist, basically. If you were to try and set up an online encyclopedia that was run on a traditional profit capitalist model, where you put lots of ads everywhere and you could make lots of money off of it, the problem that you run up against is the fact that Wikipedia exists. Yeah. And so you can never outcompete that.
No, of course not.
So, in these kind of new industries, where it's very insecure labour and there's not much workers' rights and things, like Uber, for example, there's two models that you can follow, both of which have that sort of same problem, with the difference being the ownership model. So you could plausibly have an Uber that was run like Wikipedia. If you just made all the software open source and everyone used the same one, and nobody used it in particular, and it was just a free way of people working out who's got a car and who needs a lift and stuff.
There are that
would work fine.
Some apps on that model. I don't know whether they've reached Britain, but there's one in America, which was started particularly by black ex-Uber employees. I think in Chicago. Yeah, I mean, these are things that have started to happen. But like you say, they run up against the existing kind of more capitalist competition.
It would seem to me that we've got a capitalist system that is sort of the material conditions of the economy, not to get too Marxist again, are such that there's lots of things that are inherently non-capitalist, straining to come into existence, that can't properly, because they're trying to insert themselves into a fundamentally different kind of system, which is capitalism, which is what runs everything at the moment. So that's kind of how I'd view something like a universal basic income. It would be as an attempt to kind of take that pressure off. I don't think it's an end game thing. It's not a way to solve the issue, but it would help things that would be able to provide a sort of next stage of economic development beyond the problems that capitalism's currently getting. It would help things like that to get going, because it would allow things to reshape themselves properly without that problem of them running up against the old system.
To me, it's a necessary. It is made necessary by the fact that automation is going to trend upwards.
But that's the thing, is that if you brought it about, then what it would be used to solve is that people aren't getting so many jobs and things, and people can't get wages in the normal way, and so they'll switch over to the universal basic income bit, and then they'll do non-waged labour in the rest of the economy, because that's what's going to need to replace it. But the more that happens, the more you erode the base that's paying for the universal basic income. So ultimately, it will make itself obsolete. But I'd say that if that's managed properly, that can be a good thing, because then you can end up properly decoupling the idea of work and wages, and then you've got a non-capitalist system.
Yeah, but there's also the fact that you can levy the taxes on the corporations that own the the automated software and machines. I think that's the kind of the general idea, at least in sort of the medium term. That you will erode the base of people paying income tax, but corporation tax will still be a thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously the idea of decoupling labour, the idea that you have to work, that there's a moral imperative to work, is obviously a pernicious fallacy. Really. I mean, there's no reason why it should be the case. I've never met anyone who could answer the question, why is working better than not working? I mean, there are some practical reasons.
Ultimately, people do like to spend their time doing stuff.
Yes.
People have free time; they would use it for something.
There's a reason for activity, but why is there isn't necessarily a reason for jobs,
like waged labour. Yeah.
Yes. There's no moral imperative.
The idea that waged labour is a sort of soft version of slavery is very well established in like when it first started to come about. Wage labour, in our sense, that was basically what all working people considered it as, to the point where it was the slogan of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln won the presidency on the basis of the idea that wage labour was a bad thing fundamentally.
Yeah. I mean, it's also not that old an idea. Really?
No, not at all.
I mean, as a kind of a major part of the economy, it's very new. I mean, it's always existed to a point, within like the bureaucracy of like older, states. But as a kind of significant sector, wage labour is very new. So there's no reason why it must remain part of the economy, because it hasn't been for long. So
and I think arguably there are some quite serious reasons why it can't remain a major part of the economy for long.
Yeah, of which automation is, I would say, the most pressing.
But the trouble is that all of this is very good, but in the context of climate change, we don't really have the time to let it evolve in the normal way. We sort of need to... This is very pressing, and the corporate system is what's standing in the way of dealing with it properly.
I did want to quickly mention, this isn't really a political issue, but I just wanted to let everyone know that we've got some new cousins, because they've discovered a new species of orangutan in Indonesia. Unfortunately, there are only 800 of them.
Oh, yeah. So if I remember correctly, there were previously 2 species of orangutan that we knew about.
There were.
Previously, there were 2 species of all kinds of great ape, apart from us. There's only one of us. But now, one of them apparently has 3. There's 2 kinds of chimps, and there's 2 kinds of gorillas. Apparently 3 kinds of orangutan.
It's the first new species of great ape to be discovered since the bonobo, which was 1925.
Yes, that's the smaller of the 2 chimp ones.
The matriarchal one, the one that...
Yes, the nice one.
Yes, the nice one, rather than the chimpanzees, which do war. The only other animal to do it properly like us. The ants sort of do it, but they're more of like a weird hive mind situation going on. It's not proper war.
Often when you hear about like intelligence experiments going on with chimps, teaching them to sign language and things, that's usually bonobos.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you can sort of talk to a bonobo, whereas the other sort of
common chimp, I think it's
common chimpanzee, they incredibly aggressive. Really incredibly, and really, really strong. They would rip you in 2 if they felt like it. They're quite small, but their arms are just so incredibly powerful.
Really long arms as well. It's really odd. They're like legs.
Yeah. Well, I suppose they sort of, because they use them in a similar way, don't they? They have to be quite.
But the feet on the end of their actual legs look like hands.
Love a chimp. Anyway,
love a chimp. Yeah.
We've got some new cousins, but they're already endangered, which sort of I think highlights not so much climate change, more habitat destruction. But
yeah, we don't even know how many species we've driven extinct, because we've likely driven quite a few extinct without ever even discovering them first.
The Indonesian government are going to just wall it off essentially. But like, right, no one's coming in here.
I think the furthest north monkeys live is northern Japan.
Oh, right.
It's pretty far north. Yeah. And you get lemurs, but only on Madagascar.
You do.
I think that's pretty much all.
The Bushbabies. They're primates, aren't they?
Are they? Right. I thought they were marsupials.
Are they marsupials? I don't know. I'm sure there is another type of primate.
There's gibbons.
Yeah, the gibbons are apes, but it's not great.
They are apes, they're not great apes.
Yes. technically called galagos, apparently. Bushbabies. But I prefer bushbabies. But yes, they are small nocturnal primates native to continent.
Oh, right, okay.
And make up the family Galagidae, apparently, according to Wikipedia.
Are they not what they call high primates, then?
I assume not.
Because there's two branches. There's higher primates, which is monkeys and apes. I think there's lower primates, which is, I thought, just lemurs, but maybe bushbabies as well.
Yes, no, it consists of the Strepsirini, which are the suborder you're talking about. They consist of the lemurs, the galagos, the potos, and the lorises from India and Southeast Asia.
Ooh. Delightful.
I've not heard of a loris before, but they're quite nice, aren't they? Yeah. Well, there you go. So yeah, it's not just lemurs. Ooh, apparently there were extinct ones. Extinct fossils have been found in France and Germany.
Huh?
Yeah. And also the Western United States. Imagine a French lemur. Yeah.
Well, but the ringtail one, that'd suit the shirt.
It would actually, wouldn't it? Yeah.
You know, that shirt that all French people wear.
Yeah, that one. The same one that all prisoners wear. Yeah, that
yes,
one.
yeah.
I like that one.
That's
But
not
it's
a coincidence.
Just, the difference is beret, French, little mask that goes over your eyes. Burglar.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's how it works. French burglars, do they wear two striped shirts, or is it just the one but with both accessories?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, that would make more sense, wouldn't it? It would.
Yeah.
Right.
What would you do with the garlic?
Well, you have to. I mean, the thing
Around
is,
the neck.
If you carry the garlic around with you as a burglar,
People think you're French.
Yeah, but you also, but on the
So you
actual
can't get caught.
mission itself, you get noted, wouldn't you? Because the smell.
Ah, that's true.
It might sort of. If you got like calling card, I suppose you could leave like a little clove of garlic at every scene of the crime where you'd.
What the hell are we talking about?
Long enough. I think we really probably should just shut up because this has gone very, very strange.
Sorry, I've lost it.
Yeah.
I'll be alright in a minute. Alright, I'm okay.
Dear, oh dear. So, yes. Yeah, apparently if you talk about Marxist economic theory for half an hour and then mention Bushbabies, that is the correct combination of topics to send David into a giggling fit.
It's the French lemurs with the stripy
No, they're not
burglar
French
garlic.
lemurs, they're French burglars that look like
French
lemurs.
burglars, yeah.
That's very important. Don't get them mixed up. The French lemurs are different. They're perfectly nice. There's no garlic at all involved. I suppose you could fry one, but it's a bit gruesome, really.
I was going to say, is a lemur nicer with garlic or?
I don't know. I've not eaten one. I like to think I'd eat most animals. I think I'd draw the line at primates. I think. Slightly too close to cannibalism. I'll give most things a go. But yeah.
I wouldn't eat a chimp.
No, I definitely wouldn't eat a chimp. No.
Even if it was wearing a beret.
Especially if it was wearing a beret, it'd be racist.
That's true.
You know.
Anti-French. Yeah.
Anti-French, yeah. Right. I'm calling time.
How did we get here?
I don't know, but I mean, we're paddling our way out.
Away.
Right now. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Revolutionary Despatches. You make me laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Revolutionary Despatches. Thank you, comrades, for your time and attention. Viva la Revolution.